It was an ordinary evening when the call came in. The doctor had just finished his rounds at the hospital and was ready to head home. But something about the phone ringing at that hour didn't sit right. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, urgent. "Doctor, we need you to go to a remote location. A 5-year-old girl has fallen critically ill, and we can't seem to stabilize her. The family is in a panic. Please hurry." The doctor, puzzled but compelled, immediately agreed. As he gathered his medical bag and prepared to leave, the weight of the request pressed on his chest. A critical case like this was unusual for the time of night, and something about the tone of the voice made the doctor's gut twist. It wasn't just a call for help, it felt like a summons. But who could have known the danger he was about to walk into? The directions led him into the heart of a quiet, forgotten corner of the city. After what felt like an eternity of winding roads, the doctor found himself at an old, run-down house at the edge of town. A small, frail house with peeling paint and a lawn that hadn't been mowed in years. As he approached, he noticed a strange sense of stillness. No lights were on, and even the sound of the wind seemed to quiet down as if the house itself were holding its breath. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, a little louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "You're the doctor, right?" she asked with a tremor in her voice. The doctor nodded, stepping inside without another word. As soon as he entered the dimly lit hallway, the air felt thick, suffocating. He followed the woman through the narrow corridor to a small room at the back. Inside, a young girl lay in bed, her small, frail form barely visible beneath a heap of blankets. The doctor's breath caught in his throat. The child's skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide open, but blank. She didn't move, not even when he approached. Her chest rose and fell with a faint, shallow breath. "What's wrong with her?" the doctor asked, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. The elderly woman, her hands shaking, replied, "We don't know, doctor. She's been like this for hours. We've tried everything. We thought she was just sick at first, but this is different. Something's wrong, and I don't know what it is." The doctor, sensing that something was off, moved closer to the girl. His fingers grazed her wrist, searching for a pulse. The faint beat under his fingertips was barely noticeable. He checked her vitals, her breathing, everything seemed normal, but the emptiness in her eyes told him something wasn't right. "Is she?" the doctor started, but the words were hard to say. "Is she unconscious, or, she's awake, but not awake," the woman answered, her voice strained. "She's been like this for days. It's like she's somewhere else." The doctor frowned, puzzled. This didn't make sense. He had never encountered a case like this. It wasn't just the girl's condition, there was something eerie about the whole house. It was as if the air itself had become heavy with an unspoken tension. As the doctor observed the girl, she suddenly blinked, her eyes focusing on him. But it wasn't the confused gaze of a child who had been sick. There was something else there, something ancient, calculating. For a brief moment, the girl's lips parted, and she whispered something so softly that it could have been mistaken for a breeze. "Help me, but don't," the doctor froze, a chill running down his spine. What did she mean? He leaned in closer, his heart pounding. The girl's eyes locked onto his, unblinking, as if she could see straight into his soul. "Please," she repeated, her voice barely audible but filled with a weight that the doctor couldn't explain. Before the doctor could respond, the room suddenly grew colder. A gust of wind blew through the cracks in the old house, and the girl's body twitched violently, her eyes flashing open wide. The doctor jumped back, startled, as the girl began to convulse in a way he had never seen before. It was as if her very being was fighting against something invisible, something powerful that was trying to control her. The elderly woman screamed in panic, her frail hands shaking as she tried to hold the girl down. The doctor's instincts kicked in. He rushed to the girl's side, trying to calm her down, but it was useless. There was something else at play here, something beyond his medical knowledge, something he couldn't understand. As he struggled to stabilize the girl, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The temperature dropped even further, and the faint whispers in the air grew louder, almost as if the house itself were speaking in an ancient language. The doctor, drenched in sweat, stumbled backward in fear. There was no logical explanation for what was happening, and yet, he felt the undeniable presence of something far more sinister. It was at that moment that the doctor realized that this was no ordinary emergency. There was something hidden here, something that even he, with all his years of medical training, couldn't explain. What he didn't know was that this strange encounter was only the beginning, and the truth about the girl and her family would shake him to his core. As the doctor struggled to make sense of the situation, a single thought echoed in his mind: what had he walked into? The room was unnervingly silent now, save for the faint hum of the wind rattling the old windows. The girl had stopped convulsing, her body slack against the bed. Her eyes were still wide open, but now they seemed to be empty, as if the life had drained from her. The doctor's mind raced, unsure of what he had just witnessed. He quickly checked her pulse again, praying it was a simple medical anomaly. The pulse was weak but still there. It was enough to keep him from panicking, but not enough to ease his growing dread. "What's happening to her?" the doctor muttered, more to himself than to the woman standing next to him. The elderly woman had collapsed into a chair, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked haunted, as though the years had suddenly caught up with her. "I told you," she said softly, her voice shaking. "She's not like other children." The doctor's attention snapped back to her, his brow furrowing in confusion. He needed more information, something to explain the inexplicable. He looked at the girl, now eerily still, her breathing shallow but steady. "Explain," he demanded gently. "Tell me everything you know." The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously to the girl, as if checking to make sure she couldn't hear. But the doctor noticed that the girl wasn't moving, she wasn't even blinking. "She wasn't always like this," the woman began, her voice low and tinged with fear. "When she was born, she was different. Special, they said. The doctors called it a miracle. But I always knew something was off." The doctor remained silent, trying to absorb the information. There were many children with rare conditions, but this felt different. It didn't feel like a medical case at all. Her father, he disappeared years ago. No one ever found out what happened to him. But the strange things started happening after he left. The house, the air, it all changed. And then she. The woman trailed off, unable to finish. The doctor's mind spun with the pieces of the puzzle, but none of it seemed to fit. The woman pulled a key from her pocket, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. The doctor's curiosity piqued, but there was a sense of unease that settled in his stomach. "This is where she keeps it," the woman said, her voice barely a whisper. The door creaked open. "This journal is all he left behind, and I have a feeling it's the only way we'll understand what's happening to her now." As the doctor looked closer, one page caught his attention. It was a map, but not one that he recognized. It seemed to lead to an isolated location deep in the wilderness. The doctor's eyes narrowed. Could this be connected to the girl's condition? Was this where her father had gone? He closed the journal, feeling an unfamiliar weight in his chest. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this?" he asked, turning back to the woman. "I couldn't," she whispered, almost in fear. "Who would believe me? Who would believe that something like this could happen to a little girl?" The doctor paused, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Everything about this case screamed mystery, mystery that went far beyond anything he had ever encountered. There was no longer any doubt in his mind. This wasn't just an illness. This was something far bigger, something dangerous. And he was about to get caught in the middle of it. The doctor sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of the journal in his hands feeling heavier than it had just moments before. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows against the walls, amplifying the eerie atmosphere that had settled over the house. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, there was an unnatural stillness. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any noise ever could. His mind raced as he processed the information. The journal, the mysterious map, the cryptic symbols, everything about this case seemed impossible to explain through any medical or scientific lens. He was no longer sure whether he was facing a medical emergency or something far more sinister. Something supernatural, perhaps. Or maybe even something otherworldly. The girl's condition had been unlike anything he had ever encountered. Her strange behavior, her cryptic words, the eerie connection to her father, it all pointed to something far greater than a simple illness. And yet, the doctor was sworn to heal, to diagnose, to find rational explanations. But what if there was no explanation? What if this was something beyond his ability to fix? The woman, who had been standing in the doorway watching him silently, stepped forward. Her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "You're not going to leave, are you?" she asked, her eyes filled with something between hope and fear. The doctor looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "What do you mean?" "I've seen it in your eyes. You know there's something wrong here, something more than just a sick child. You feel it, too, don't you? That weight in the air, the strange energy that seems to pulse from this house?" He nodded, though part of him wanted to deny it. What had started as a simple call to attend to a sick child was quickly spiraling into something he didn't know how to handle. "You need to understand," the woman continued, her voice steady now. "She is not just a girl. She's different. Her father. He was involved in things that go far beyond anything I can explain. Things that no one should know about." The doctor was silent, the words hanging between them like a heavy fog. He wasn't sure if the woman was just grieving, trying to make sense of a terrible situation, or if there was something to what she was saying. But the evidence was mounting, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. The girl's condition wasn't a typical sickness. The way she had convulsed earlier, almost as if something had been trying to take over her, wasn't something any medical textbook could explain. And then there was the journal, filled with symbols and mysterious writings. And the map, where did it lead? What was so important about the place it showed? His mind wrestled with the decision. Part of him wanted to walk away, to call in a team of experts, to hand off the case and let someone more experienced deal with the unknowns. But another part of him, the part that couldn't ignore a mystery, knew that walking away wasn't an option. Something about this girl, about the family, was drawing him in. And he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here. To figure out the truth. "What happened to her father?" the doctor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where is he now?" The woman shook her head, a sorrowful look crossing her face. "He vanished. Just like that. One day, he was here, and the next, nothing. We didn't hear from him for years. But I know he didn't leave by choice. Whatever he was involved in, I don't think it let him go. And I fear it's come for her now." The doctor could see the fear in her eyes, and for the first time, he felt it too. There was something out there, something that had already taken the father and now seemed to be turning its attention to the girl. He needed answers, but where to start? The map and the journal, the place it pointed to. Could this be the key to understanding what was happening? The doctor turned back to the journal, carefully flipping through the pages once again. He ran his finger over the strange symbols, feeling a tingling sensation under his touch, as though the pages were alive. His eyes fell once again on the map. The location it marked wasn't far from here, just a few hours' drive into the wilderness. But why? What could possibly be so important about that place? Do you have any idea what's at this location? He asked, showing the woman the map. Her eyes widened as she gazed at the map, her expression darkening. I've never been there. But I've heard stories. Old stories from the locals. They say it's a place where time doesn't behave like it should. Where things from the past still linger. Some say it's cursed. Others think it's the key to understanding the strange things that have been happening around here. The doctor felt a chill run down his spine. Cursed. Time doesn't behave like it should? These were not the kinds of explanations he was used to dealing with. Yet, everything about this case was pointing in that direction. And despite his rational mind telling him to turn away, something deep inside him knew that this was something he couldn't ignore. I need to go there, the doctor said, more to himself than to her. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Doctor, please, you don't understand. No one who goes there comes back the same. If they come back at all. The doctor stood up, his resolve solidifying. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The girl needed him, she needed him to understand what was happening. And perhaps, just as importantly, he needed to understand the truth about her father. The story had begun, and he was already too deep to turn back. I'll be fine, the doctor said, his voice firm. But I'm going to need you to come with me. Her expression softened, but the fear in her eyes never left. Then we'll need to leave before it's too late, she whispered. As the doctor prepared to leave, the girl's eyes suddenly opened, locking onto his. The same strange energy that had filled the room earlier seemed to return, swirling around them. And for a fleeting moment, the doctor could have sworn he saw something flicker in her gaze. Something ancient. He was about to uncover something bigger than anything he had ever imagined. And he could feel it, the danger, the mystery, the pull toward the unknown. The doctor had always prided himself on being a rational man. He had seen countless medical cases in his career, some of them strange, but always explainable. Yet, as he stepped away from the girl's room and prepared to follow the woman out of the house, a gnawing sense of unease settled over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something he wasn't prepared for, something that would forever alter his view of the world. The woman led him out of the house and into the waiting car. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, as they drove toward the remote location shown on the map in the journal. The road stretched out before them, winding through the dense trees of the forest. The deeper they drove, the more the world seemed to fall away. The air grew thicker, and the silence became oppressive, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. As they neared the location, the doctor could feel the tension in his chest tighten. This place was far from ordinary. It was as if they had crossed a threshold into a different realm, one where time and reality bent in ways he couldn't comprehend. The map had led them to an overgrown path that disappeared into the woods, a path that seemed abandoned for decades. The woman stopped the car, her hands trembling as she turned to the doctor. "We're here," she said quietly. "This is where it all began." The doctor stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath his feet. He looked around, but saw only the dense trees, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. A sense of foreboding washed over him, but there was no turning back now. He needed to understand the truth. They began walking along the narrow path, the air growing colder as they ventured deeper into the woods. It felt as though the very atmosphere was thick with history, each step they took uncovering something older and darker than what they had left behind. After what seemed like an eternity of walking, they finally came to a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone structure, covered in ivy and moss. It was ancient, far older than anything the doctor had ever seen. The stones seemed to hum with a strange energy, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of time. The woman stopped just before the entrance, her face pale as she looked at the doctor. This is where her father came. He was obsessed with it. He said it held the answers to everything. The doctor's heart pounded as he stepped closer to the structure, his breath coming out in quick bursts. There was something undeniably powerful about this place. The air felt electric, as if the very ground beneath his feet was alive with energy. He reached out to touch one of the stones, and as soon as his fingers made contact, a jolt of electricity shot through him, making him stumble back in shock. His heart raced, his mind reeling from the strange sensation. "Doctor?" The woman's voice trembled behind him, but he didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on something ahead of him. Through the crack in the stones, a faint light flickered in the distance. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter with each passing moment. The doctor felt an undeniable pull toward it. The urge to step forward was overwhelming, but he held back, his instincts warning him that this was not something to approach lightly. "It's him," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Her father. He left something here, something he couldn't take with him." The doctor turned to look at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you saying? Her father is still here?" The woman nodded slowly, her face pale. "I don't know how to explain it, but, yes. He's here. He left something for her. I don't know if it's a warning, or a way to save her, but this is where everything changed." The doctor's mind raced. Could it be possible? Could the girl's father have left a clue behind? A message? The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and the pull toward it became stronger. The doctor felt as though the very earth beneath his feet was urging him to move forward, to uncover the truth. Without a word, the doctor stepped into the structure, the woman following close behind. As they made their way deeper into the stone chamber, the light seemed to guide their way, growing stronger as they moved closer. And then, they found it. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small, ancient artifact. It was a globe, unlike any the doctor had ever seen. It was made of some kind of dark metal, and it shimmered with an otherworldly light. The surface was covered in strange symbols, many of which matched the ones in the journal the doctor had seen earlier. The woman gasped as she stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and fear. "That's it. That's what her father was after." The doctor reached out to touch the artifact, but as his fingers brushed against the cool metal, the ground beneath him suddenly trembled. The walls of the chamber shook violently, and a loud, deep hum filled the air. The light around the artifact pulsed in time with the vibrations, and the room seemed to collapse in on itself. The doctor's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "What is this? What have we uncovered?" The woman's voice was barely a whisper. "This is it. This is what's been haunting us all these years." Suddenly, the light around the artifact flared brightly, blinding the doctor. He stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the intense glow. When the light faded, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The artifact was no longer on the pedestal. It had vanished. And in its place, there was a symbol burned into the stone, one the doctor had seen before, in the journal, in the girl's room. The symbol of an eye. And then, from the darkness, a voice echoed in the chamber. "Welcome, Doctor. You've come too late." The doctor froze, his breath caught in his throat. The voice that echoed through the chamber wasn't just a whisper, it was a presence, alive and commanding. It filled the room, reverberating off the stone walls, as if it came from all directions at once. He spun around, trying to locate the source, but the room was empty. The woman, too, stood motionless, her face pale and filled with fear, her eyes locked on the symbol. "Who's there?" the doctor demanded, his voice sounding much less confident than he felt. "What do you want?" But the voice only responded with a soft chuckle, an unsettling sound that seemed to rattle the very air around them. "You're too late," the voice repeated, now softer, but somehow more menacing. The girl is mine. Always has been. The doctor's pulse quickened, his mind struggling to make sense of the situation. The words sent a shiver down his spine. The girl is mine. Always has been. What did that mean? Was the voice referring to the girl in the house? Was she more than what she appeared to be? His gaze turned to the woman beside him, searching for any sign of recognition, but her face was blank, pale, trembling, as if she were hearing something that only she could understand. "Who are you?" the doctor asked again, his voice more desperate now. The voice responded, this time clearer, colder. "I am everything. I am nothing. I am the force that binds this world together. You cannot save her. She was never meant to be saved." The doctor felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He had never believed in things like this, mysterious forces, unseen entities. He was a doctor, a man of science. But everything around him now, the journal, the artifacts, the strange occurrences in the house, had turned his world upside down. The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "This is what I was afraid of. This is what I couldn't say before. The girl, she isn't just a child. She is the key." The doctor turned to her, his mind racing. The key to what? The woman's eyes filled with tears as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father, he was a part of something ancient, something bigger than we can understand. He was trying to protect her. Trying to keep her from becoming what she was born to be. The doctor felt a wave of confusion wash over him. What was she saying? Was the girl some kind of weapon? A vessel for something beyond comprehension? He didn't know, but the gravity of the situation was becoming increasingly clear. "What does that mean? What is she?" the doctor demanded, his voice shaking with frustration. The woman wiped away a tear, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the doctor's arm. Her father, he didn't just disappear. He merged with it. The force that controls her. That's why no one could find him. He became a part of it, a part of her. And now it's coming for all of us. The doctor's mind reeled as he processed the words. The girl, the key, her father had merged with something so powerful that it was manipulating everything around them. But what could that possibly mean? How was this connected to the girl's condition? Why was she being controlled by this unseen force? The voice spoke again, this time softer, more menacing. "You should have left when you had the chance, doctor. She is not your patient anymore. She is my creation. And you are just another obstacle to be eliminated." The room grew colder, and the doctor could feel the temperature drop drastically. His breath came out in short bursts, visible in the air before him. A sensation of dread settled over him, his body stiffening as if caught in the grip of something far beyond his understanding. He felt as though the very walls were closing in on him. "Get out," the woman cried, pulling the doctor back by the arm. "You don't understand. It's too late now. The more you try to stop it, the stronger it gets. The girl she's the vessel. She's the one holding it together. Without her, everything will fall apart." The doctor's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What happens if we don't do anything? What happens to her?" "She will change," the woman said, her voice full of sorrow. "She will become what her father was meant to be. A vessel for the power that will destroy us all." The words hung in the air like an unbearable weight. The doctor could feel the panic rising within him. He couldn't let this happen. But was there still a way to stop it? He looked back at the symbol burned into the stone. It seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive. The glow had shifted again, becoming brighter, as if something deep within the structure was awakening. Could the symbol be the key to ending this? Could it be the way to sever the connection between the girl and this force? I have to try, the doctor muttered to himself, moving closer to the glowing symbol. The woman grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. No. It's too dangerous. You'll only make it worse. Please, doctor, you have to leave. You have to get out of here while you still can. But the doctor could see that there was no other choice. The girl's life, her very soul, was at stake. And if there was even the smallest chance he could stop whatever was controlling her, he had to take it. With one last glance at the woman, the doctor reached out to touch the symbol, his fingers trembling as they made contact with the stone. And then, the world exploded into light. The moment the doctor touched the symbol, the world around him seemed to shatter. The ground beneath his feet trembled violently, and the walls of the ancient structure began to crack, as if the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The light that had flickered around the symbol suddenly expanded, swallowing everything in its path. The doctor stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the blinding intensity. The air felt thick, suffocating. It was as though the space itself was alive, pulsating with an energy so raw, so ancient, that it felt almost alien. The sound that filled the chamber was deafening, a hum that vibrated in the doctor's chest, making his heart race uncontrollably. His vision blurred, and he felt his body sway as if it were being pulled in every direction at once. "Doctor, don't," the woman screamed, but her voice was barely audible over the cacophony of sounds. He couldn't hear her. He couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming power surging around him. The light seemed to have a life of its own, flowing like liquid energy, swirling around him as if trying to bind him to it. For a moment, he felt weightless, like he was no longer part of this world, but suspended in some strange limbo between realms. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the light vanished. The hum faded, and the room fell eerily silent. The doctor blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden darkness. He was still in the chamber, standing on solid ground, but everything had changed. The walls were no longer the same. The stone structure now felt alive, the cracks in the walls pulsing faintly, as though the building itself was breathing. The woman stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror. The doctor could feel her fear, the dread emanating from her in waves. What just happened?" the doctor whispered, his voice hoarse, his mind struggling to catch up with what he had just experienced. But the woman didn't answer. Instead, she backed away from him slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. She was staring at him as if he were no longer the same person. "No," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "No. You touched it." The doctor's mind raced, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The light, the strange sensation, the overwhelming presence. Everything about it felt unreal, like he had crossed a threshold into a world where the rules of physics no longer applied. But one thing was clear, he had felt it. Something had changed. Something had been unlocked. "You don't understand," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have touched it. The power, it's in you now. It's inside of you." The doctor took a step back, feeling the weight of her words. His head was spinning, and the room seemed to close in around him. It was as though the very air had changed, thick with an unnatural energy, like it was alive, watching him. He looked at the woman, confused, his thoughts scattered. "What do you mean?" "What's inside of me?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice. She shook her head slowly, her face filled with sorrow. "You were never meant to come here. You were never meant to touch it. But now the connection has been made. It's in you. The force, the entity, it has a foothold. And it will use you." The doctor felt his heart skip a beat. The force. The same force that had controlled the girl, the same power that had consumed her father, was now inside him. He could feel it, just beneath the surface, pulsing in his veins like a living thing. It was dark, overwhelming, and hungry. What is this thing?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fear and frustration. "What does it want?" The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with regret. "It wants control. It wants everything. It will stop at nothing until it takes over, until it uses you to fulfill its purpose. And there's no escaping it. You've already made the choice." The doctor's mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The girl, the father, the artifact. Everything pointed to one horrifying truth: whatever this force was, it wasn't just controlling the girl. It was controlling everything around her. It had manipulated her father, it had used her as a vessel, and now it was using him. Suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind, the girl's words back at the house. "Help me, but don't." She had known. She had known something the doctor hadn't understood. She had warned him. The woman took a step toward him, her voice low and desperate. "You can still leave. You can still escape before it's too late. You don't have to be a part of this. Please, doctor, leave now." But the doctor could feel it, could feel the presence inside him, gnawing at the edges of his mind, urging him to act. It wasn't just in him, it was taking over him. The more he fought it, the stronger it became. He could sense it, like an invisible hand reaching into his thoughts, pulling him toward something terrible. He had to stop it. But how? The woman's voice broke through his thoughts. "You can't fight it. You'll never win. It's too powerful. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The doctor clenched his fists, the pressure building inside his chest. "I'm not giving up. I'll stop it, somehow." Before the woman could respond, the light from the artifact flared again, brighter this time, like a warning. The room trembled, and the ground shook violently beneath their feet. "It's here," the woman whispered. "It's coming. And now, it's coming for you." The doctor looked around, his heart pounding. The walls were closing in. The very air was vibrating, thick with energy. And deep in the darkness, he could feel the force, alive, unstoppable. It was only a matter of time before it took everything. The chamber felt alive with an electric tension, the ground beneath the doctor trembling with an energy that was both familiar and terrifying. The air, once cold, now pulsed with heat, as though the very world was closing in on him. The force that had been awakened, the one that had taken the girl's father, the one that had been lurking in the shadows of her existence, was now in him. The doctor's chest tightened, and his heart raced. The ancient presence inside him pushed against his consciousness, urging him to submit, to surrender to its power. It whispered promises of control, of unimaginable power, but the doctor resisted, clenching his jaw as he tried to maintain his grip on reality. The woman, standing near the doorway, watched him with a mixture of pity and horror. She had warned him. She had pleaded with him to leave before it was too late. But now, it was clear, the decision had already been made. There was no running from this. The force, the entity, had already marked him. It had already begun to take root inside him. "You don't have to do this," the woman said, her voice barely audible above the deafening hum of energy in the room. "You can still turn back. You can still save yourself." But the doctor didn't answer. His mind was too far gone, caught in the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that crashed through him like waves. He could feel it, the power, coursing through him, urging him to act. To become one with it. To claim the strength that had consumed the girl and her father. His fingers twitched, and his breath quickened as the world around him began to blur. The walls of the chamber, once firm and solid, now seemed to ripple like water, shifting and bending in response to the force within him. The woman's voice faded into the background, drowned out by the roar of the entity. His entire being was consumed by the presence, an overwhelming pressure that threatened to break him. But then, something shifted. In the back of his mind, buried beneath the chaos of thoughts and emotions, there was a flicker of clarity. A spark of something human, something pure. A memory. The girl's eyes, the way they had looked at him when she had whispered her cryptic words. "Help me, but don't." The doctor snapped his eyes open, and the overwhelming pressure within him faltered, if only for a moment. She had warned me. The realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. The girl hadn't just been an innocent victim. She hadn't been merely a vessel for this force, she had been a part of it, yes, but there was something else. A part of her, deep inside, still yearned for help. She was still fighting, even if her body wasn't. Even if her mind had been consumed. The doctor's resolve hardened. He could feel the force still gnawing at him, trying to take control, but now he knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about saving the girl. This wasn't about fighting an unstoppable force head-on, it was about understanding it. Using what he had learned, using what was now inside him, to break the connection. He turned to the woman, his voice steady but filled with determination. "You said the girl's father," he merged with the force. "But that doesn't mean she has to. I can stop it. I can stop it now." The woman shook her head in disbelief, her face pale. "You don't know what you're saying. You can't control it. It's too powerful." But the doctor wasn't listening anymore. He focused all his energy, all his thoughts, on the presence that had taken root inside him. He could feel it, its hunger, its thirst for power. But now, he understood it. He could hear it, faintly, like a whisper in the dark. "You are weak. You cannot fight me. You are mine." The doctor took a deep breath, centering himself, closing his eyes as he focused on the sensation. This was no ordinary battle. This was a battle for his soul, for the very essence of who he was. And he was not going to lose. He remembered the journal, the symbols. The map. The force that had controlled the girl and her father had been tied to something ancient, something older than humanity itself. But he had seen the patterns. He had seen the clues that led him here. And now, he understood. The presence inside him thrashed violently, but the doctor held firm. He spoke aloud, his voice low and commanding, his words forming a chant that he didn't fully understand but felt deep within his bones. "I will not be yours. I will not bow to you." For a brief moment, the world seemed to still. The force hesitated, confused by the doctor's defiance. The doctor pressed on, pushing every ounce of his will into the words that escaped his lips. He could feel the entity retreating, like a tide pulling away from the shore, slowly, but inevitably. But he knew the truth now, the truth about what had happened to her father, about what she had become. And though the immediate danger had passed, he also knew that the shadows of this ancient power would never fully leave. But for now, the girl was safe. And that was enough. As the doctor stood up, taking one last look at the strange, ancient chamber, a sense of finality washed over him. He had learned a valuable lesson, that sometimes, the greatest strength comes not from fighting, but from understanding. And as he turned to leave, the world outside felt different, as if it had been quietly reset, the threat gone, for now. He had won.